She wept over every loaf she sold, until the day a mysterious cowboy bought them all. What he whispered to her wasn't, "I love you." It was something far more dangerous, something that made the whole town turn against them both. Dust hung heavy in the morning air of Millbrook, Colorado, 1884. The town square buzzed with its usual Saturday market energy, but there was one corner where people kept their distance. Under a faded canvas tent, Elena Moreau arranged her fresh bread on wooden boards, tears falling silently onto the golden crusts. The townspeople called her the Weeping Widow, and most believed her tears cursed the food she made. Elena was 26, with dark hair always pulled back in a simple bun and hands stained with flour that never quite washed clean. For 2 years since her husband Pierre died, she had come to this market every Saturday, selling the only thing she knew how to make. And for 2 years, she had cried over every single loaf. "Poor thing," whispered Mrs. Henderson to her neighbor, both women standing safely 20 feet away from Elena's stand. "Still crying after all this time. It ain't natural." The other woman nodded, clutching her shopping basket tighter. "My husband says grief that deep means guilt. Maybe she had something to do with Pierre's accident." Elena heard the whispers. She always did, but she kept arranging her bread, wiping her tears with her apron, tried to ignore the way people crossed the street to avoid her. Business was terrible. Most days she sold maybe 3 or 4 loaves, barely enough to keep her small house and pay for flour. That's when she noticed him, a tall man in dusty boots and a worn cowboy hat, standing by the blacksmith shop, watching her. He had been there yesterday too, and the day before. Always watching, never approaching. Elena's hands trembled as she placed another loaf on the display. Something about his intense stare made her nervous. The man was broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind of working cowboy might wear to town. But he didn't move like the other ranch hands who came to market. He moved with purpose, like a man carrying secrets. "Elena Moreau?" The voice startled her. She looked up to find the mysterious cowboy standing right in front of her stand. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the serious set of his mouth. He looked like a man who had seen too much. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. No one used her name anymore. Most people just pointed and whispered about the widow. He looked down at her bread display, then back at her tear-stained face. "How much for all of it?" Elena blinked in confusion. "All of what?" "Every loaf. The whole lot." He pulled out a leather pouch from his coat pocket. "Name your price." The market seemed to grow quiet around them. Elena could feel every eye in the square watching this strange transaction. No one had ever wanted to buy all her bread. Most people wouldn't even buy one loaf. I don't understand," Elena stammered. "Why would you want all of it?" The cowboy's gray eyes studied her face carefully. "Maybe I like bread. Maybe I got hungry cowboys to feed." He paused, then added quietly, "Maybe I got reasons you don't need to know about yet." Elena's heart pounded. She had 37 loaves laid out, more than she had ever sold in a single day, more than she sometimes sold in a month. "That would be $18.50, she said, expecting him to laugh and walk away. Instead, he counted out the exact amount and placed it on her wooden counter. The silver coins gleamed in the morning sunlight, more money than Elena had seen at one time since Pierre died. As he began loading the bread into a large canvas sack, Elena found her voice. "Sir, I have to ask, why? People in this town, they think my bread is cursed. They say my tears make it bitter." The cowboy paused in his packing. He looked around the market square, noting how everyone was staring, how conversations had stopped to watch them. Then he leaned closer to Elena, close enough that only she could hear his words. "Your tears aren't from grief," he whispered, his voice rough and certain. "They're from guilt." Elena's world tilted. The coins on the counter blurred through her sudden tears. Her hands shook so violently that she knocked over an empty basket. "What did you say?" But the cowboy was already straightening up, shouldering his sack of bread. "Name's Jack Sullivan," he said in a normal voice, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I'll be in town for a while. Might come back for more bread next week." Elena stared at him, her face pale as fresh flour. Who are you?" Jack touched the brim of his hat. "Someone who knows the truth about what happened to Pierre." He turned to leave, then paused. "Someone who knows it wasn't an accident." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She gasped, stumbling backward into her tent pole. The remaining empty baskets tumbled to the ground with a clatter that seemed to echo across the entire market square. By the time Elena looked up, Jack Sullivan was walking away, disappearing into the crowd with her bread and her peace of mind. Around her, the townspeople began to murmur louder, their voices filled with curiosity and suspicion. "Did you hear what he said? What's that stranger want with the widow? Something about Pierre not dying in an accident?" Elena sank onto the small stool behind her counter, her legs too weak to hold her up. For 2 years, she had lived with the guilt of not being able to save her husband. For 2 years, she had cried over bread while the town whispered about her endless grief. But what Jack knew about her husband's death would change everything. Because Pierre Moreau wasn't killed in an accident. He was murdered, and now Elena had to decide. Did she want to know the truth that this stranger carried, or was ignorance safer than the dangerous path he was offering? After the mysterious cowboy bought all her bread and whispered that her tears weren't from grief but guilt, Elena's world shattered. Now she was about to learn the truth about her husband's death, a truth that would change everything. Elena barely remembered packing up her market stand or walking home. Her hands shook as she unlocked the door to the small house she had shared with Pierre. The $18.50 felt heavy in her pocket, but not as heavy as Jack Sullivan's words echoing in her mind. "Your tears aren't from grief, they're from guilt." She sank into Pierre's old chair by the fireplace, the same chair where she had held him as he died 2 years ago. The memory came flooding back like it did every night. Pierre stumbling through their front door, blood on his shirt, gasping for air. "Elena," he had whispered, "I should have listened to you. I should have stayed away from a mine." The doctor said Pierre's horse had thrown him near the old silver mine. Said he hit his head on the rocks and bled inside his brain. There was nothing anyone could have done, but Elena blamed herself. She had begged Pierre not to go to the mine that night. He said he had business there, something about the land deals he had been investigating for the newspaper. She should have stopped him. She should have hidden his horse. She should have done something. A knock at her door made Elena jump. Her heart raced. No one ever visited her anymore. Through the window, she could see Jack Sullivan standing on her porch, his hat in his hands. "Mrs. Moreau, I need to talk to you." His voice was gentle but urgent. "Please, it's important." Elena hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep the door locked, to hide from whatever truth this stranger carried. But she had lived with guilt for 2 years. Maybe it was time to face whatever came next. She opened the door just wide enough to see his face. "What do you want, Mr. Sullivan?" "To tell you what really happened that night. The night your husband died." Jack looked around nervously. "Can I come in? This isn't something for neighbors to hear." Against her better judgment, Elena stepped aside. Jack entered her small parlor, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. He was even taller inside her house, and she noticed his clothes smelled like leather and sage. "I was there that night," Jack said without sitting down. "At the silver mine. I saw everything." Elena's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the sofa, staring at him in shock. "You were there? Why didn't you help him?" Jack's face twisted with pain. "I tried. God knows I tried. But I was too late." He finally sat down across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Your husband didn't fall off his horse, Mrs. Moreau. He was beaten and left to die." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "No, that's not," the doctor said. The doctor said what he was told to say. Jack's gray eyes burned with intensity. Pierre came to that mine because someone asked him to come. Someone he trusted. Someone who knew he was getting too close to the truth about the land deals. Elena shook her head violently. You're lying. Pierre died in an accident. A terrible, stupid accident that I couldn't prevent. You couldn't prevent it because it wasn't an accident to prevent. It was murder. Jack reached into his coat and pulled out a small notebook. Pierre dropped this when they attacked him. I picked it up before anyone else could find it. Elena recognized the leather-bound notebook immediately. Pierre's reporting notebook. The one he carried everywhere when he was working on a story. With trembling hands, she took it and opened to the last entry, written in Pierre's familiar handwriting. Meeting H at mine tonight. Says he has proof about the land office corruption. Finally going to have enough evidence to publish the story. Elena worried, but this could save the whole territory from these thieves. H. Elena looked up at Jack. Who is H? Someone powerful. Someone who needed Pierre silenced before he could publish his story. Jack's jaw tightened. Someone who's been free for 2 years while you blamed yourself for not stopping your husband from riding to his death. Elena stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. If you saw this happen, why didn't you go to the sheriff? Why didn't you tell someone? Jack was quiet for a long moment. Because I was supposed to be somewhere else that night. Somewhere I couldn't legally be. And because by the time I got to Pierre, he was already dying. He made me promise something. What? To keep you safe. He said if anything happened to him, I should watch over you. Make sure they didn't come after you next. Jack stood up too. I've been watching you for 2 years, Elena. Making sure you stayed safe. But now I think it's time you knew the truth. Elena turned from the window, tears streaming down her face again. But these weren't the same tears she had cried over her bread. These were tears of rage. Who killed my husband? Someone who still lives in this town. Someone who walks these streets every day while you cry over bread and blame yourself for a murder you had no power to stop. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Tell me who. Jack shook his head. First, you need to understand what you're asking. This person has money, power, influence. If we go after them, they'll come after us. And they won't hesitate to kill again. I don't care. Elena's voice was stronger now, steadier. Pierre was investigating corruption. He died because he wanted to protect people from thieves. If I stay quiet, I'm just as guilty as his killer. Jack studied her face, seeing something new there. The broken, weeping widow was gone, replaced by a woman with fire in her eyes. The killer was someone Pierre called friend, Jack said quietly. Someone who still walks the streets of this town every day. Someone who's been watching you, waiting to see if you'd ever start asking the right questions. Elena felt ice run through her veins. They've been watching me for 2 years, and now that we're talking, they're going to know something has changed. The killer was someone Pierre trusted. Someone who still walked free while Elena blamed herself. But who in their small town had the power to murder a man and cover it up? Elena now knew her husband was murdered by someone he trusted. With Jack's help, she was about to uncover a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of their small town and put herself in deadly danger. The morning sun filtered through Elena's kitchen window as she and Jack spread Pierre's papers across her wooden table. She had barely slept, her mind racing with the revelation that her husband had been murdered. But for the first time in 2 years, her tears had stopped falling. Pierre was methodical, Elena said, sorting through her late husband's notebooks and letters. If he suspected corruption, he would have documented everything. Her hands moved with new purpose, no longer trembling with grief, but steady with determination. Jack watched her work, impressed by the change in her demeanor. Gone was the broken woman from the market. In her place sat someone who reminded him why Pierre had been so proud of his wife's sharp mind. Here, Elena said, pulling out a folder hidden behind Pierre's recipe collection. Land office documents. Look at these transfer dates. She spread out official papers covered in Pierre's handwritten notes. According to these records, the same pieces of land were sold to 3 different buyers in the same month. Jack leaned closer, studying the documents. That's impossible unless... He traced his finger along the signatures. unless someone at the land office was creating false deeds. Elena nodded grimly. Pierre wrote here that families were losing their homesteads. People who thought they owned their land free and clear suddenly found out someone else had legal papers saying the land belonged to them. A land grab scheme, Jack muttered. Someone was stealing property right out from under honest families. Elena pulled out another document, this one bearing an official seal. And look who was approving all these transfers. She pointed to a signature at the bottom. Harold Harrington, the bank president. Jack's face darkened. Harrington, he's been in this town for 15 years, owns half the businesses on Main Street. Pierre's notes say Harrington was working with someone at the land office to create fake deeds, then foreclosing on the original owners when they couldn't prove their ownership. Elena's voice grew angry. Dozens of families lost everything. Some of them had to leave town with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Jack stood up and walked to the window, checking the street outside. If Pierre had this evidence, why didn't he publish it before he died? He needed one more piece of proof. Look here. Elena pointed to Pierre's final notes. He wrote that Harrington was supposed to meet him at the mine with documents that would prove the whole conspiracy. Pierre thought Harrington was going to confess and help him expose the land office corruption. Instead, Harrington killed him. Jack's jaw tightened. Pierre trusted the wrong person. A shadow passed by Elena's front window. Both of them froze. Jack moved quickly to the side of the window and peered out carefully. Someone's watching the house, he whispered. Man in a brown coat, pretending to read a newspaper across the street. Elena joined him at the window. I don't recognize him. That's the point. Harrington knows we're digging into this. Jack gathered up Pierre's papers quickly. We need to get this evidence somewhere safe. As if summoned by their conversation, a sharp knock echoed from the front door. Elena and Jack looked at each other, fear passing between them. Mrs. Moreau, the voice was smooth, cultured, familiar. It's Harold Harrington. I'd like a word with you, if I may. Elena's face went pale. The banker was here, at her door, just hours after she had discovered his connection to Pierre's murder. Jack motioned for Elena to stay quiet and move toward the door. What do you want, Harrington? Ah, Mr. Sullivan. I heard you were in town. Harrington's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. I understand you've been asking questions about Pierre Moreau's unfortunate accident. Elena stepped forward, her fear transforming into anger. It wasn't an accident. Of course it was, my dear. Poor Pierre always was reckless around those mine shafts. Harrington's voice came through the door. But I'm concerned that certain individuals might be filling your head with wild stories. Stories that could be unhealthy for you to pursue. Jack opened the door just wide enough to see Harrington's face. The banker was impeccably dressed as always, but his eyes were cold and calculating. What kind of stories? Jack asked. Harrington smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The kind that make people wonder if the grieving widow might be losing her grip on reality. The kind that could get a woman committed to an asylum for her own protection. Elena gasped. In 1884, a woman could be declared insane and locked away with little more than a man's word, especially if that man had money and influence. Are you threatening her? Jack's voice was deadly quiet. Threatening? Heavens no. I'm offering advice. Harrington straightened his tie. Elena, you've been through so much trauma. People are concerned about your mental state. All that crying at the market, the way you've isolated yourself. It would be such a shame if you started making wild accusations that forced good people to question your sanity. Elena stepped beside Jack, her chin raised defiantly. Get off my property. Harrington's mask of politeness finally slipped. Pierre thought he was smarter than everyone else too. Look where it got him. Is that a confession? Jack stepped forward menacingly. Harrington backed away, but his voice remained steady. That's a fact. Sometimes accidents happen to people who don't know when to leave well enough alone. He tipped his hat to Elena. Good day, Mrs. Moreau. I do hope you'll consider what we've discussed. As Harrington walked away, Elena sank against the doorframe. He's going to kill us, isn't he? Jack put a protective hand on her shoulder. Not if we get him first. But Elena refused to back down. What she didn't know was that Harrington had already decided. If threats wouldn't silence her, bullets would. Elena's in more danger than she realizes. After Harrington threatened Elena with an asylum, she and Jack knew they were in grave danger. But they had no idea how quickly the entire town would turn against them, or how far Harrington would go to silence them forever. 3 days after Harrington's visit, Elena's world began to crumble in ways she never expected. It started small. Mrs. Henderson, who used to nod politely at the market, now crossed the street to avoid her. The grocer suddenly claimed he was out of flour when Elena came to buy supplies. Even Father Murphy, who had comforted her after Pierre's death, seemed uncomfortable when she attended Sunday service. "They're all talking about you," Jack said, finding Elena sitting on her porch steps that afternoon. He had been staying in the boarding house, but spent most of his time watching over her. "Harrington's been busy." Elena looked up from the letter in her hands, her eyes red with frustrated tears. Mrs. Garrett just canceled her standing order for Sunday bread. Said her husband doesn't want her associating with someone who's lost her mind with grief. Jack sat down beside her, close enough that she could smell the leather and sage scent that had become comforting to her. "What else?" "The bank sent a notice. Apparently, I'm behind on my mortgage payments." Elena's voice was bitter. "Funny thing is, I paid it just last week. But somehow there's no record of it." Jack's face darkened. "Harrington's squeezing you financially. If he can force you out of your house, you'll have no choice but to leave town." Elena stood up, pacing across her small porch. "It's working, Jack. I sold 3 loaves at market yesterday." 3. I can't survive on that." She turned to face him. "Maybe I should just leave. Take whatever money I have and start over somewhere else. Is that what you want?" Jack stood too, his gray eyes intense. To let Harrington win? To let him keep stealing from families while Pierre's murder goes unpunished? Before Elena could answer, they heard voices coming down the street. A small group of townspeople approached her house, led by Mayor Fitzpatrick and Sheriff Coleman. Elena's heart sank. This couldn't be good news. "Elena Moreau," the sheriff called out as they reached her gate. "We need to talk." Elena and Jack walked down to meet them. She could see Mrs. Henderson, the grocer Mr. Watson, and several other townspeople standing behind the mayor, all wearing expressions of concern and suspicion. "What's this about, Sheriff?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew. Mayor Fitzpatrick stepped forward. "We've been hearing disturbing reports, Elena. People are saying you've been making wild accusations against respected members of our community." "Harold Harrington came to see me yesterday," Mrs. Henderson added, her voice full of false sympathy. "He's worried about your mental state, dear. Says you've been claiming poor Pierre was murdered." Elena felt Jack tense beside her. "Pierre was murdered," she said firmly, "and Harold Harrington killed him." The crowd murmured in shock and dismay. Several people shook their heads sadly, as if Elena had just proved their point about her unstable mind. "Now, Elena," Sheriff Coleman said gently, "you know that's not true. Harold Harrington is one of the most respected men in this territory. He's helped build this town, given loans to families in need. He's been stealing land from those same families." Elena shot back. "I have proof." "What proof?" Mayor Fitzpatrick asked. "Let's see it." Elena hesitated. She and Jack had hidden Pierre's documents in her root cellar, but bringing them out now, in front of this hostile crowd, felt dangerous. Jack stepped closer to her side. "The proof exists. We're still gathering evidence." Mrs. Henderson shook her head sadly. Poor child. The grief has finally broken her mind completely. She addressed the sheriff. "Harold was right to be concerned. She needs help before she hurts herself or someone else." "I'm not crazy." Elena's voice rose in desperation. "Pierre was investigating land fraud. Harrington killed him to stop the story from coming out." "Enough," Sheriff Coleman said firmly. "Elena, you need to stop making these accusations." Harold Harrington is threatening to file charges for slander and defamation. Elena stared at the sheriff in disbelief. You're going to let him threaten me? You're supposed to protect people, not help murderers silence their victims' widows. That's exactly the kind of talk that has people worried, Mayor Fitzpatrick said. Elena, we're trying to help you. There's a nice facility in Denver where you could get the care you need. The threat was clear. Elena looked around at the faces of people she had known for years. People who had eaten her bread and offered condolences after Pierre's death. Now they all looked at her like she was a dangerous animal that needed to be caged. Get off my property, Elena said quietly. All of you. Elena, Sheriff Coleman tried again. If you don't stop these accusations. Get off my property, Elena shouted. I have nothing more to say to any of you. The crowd exchanged knowing looks, as if her anger proved their point about her mental instability. They turned to leave, but Mayor Fitzpatrick had one final warning. Elena, Harold Harrington is a patient man, but his patience has limits. Stop making trouble or face the consequences. After they left, Elena sank down on her porch steps, her head in her hands. Jack sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. They all believe him, Elena whispered. The whole town thinks I'm insane. Not all of them, Jack said quietly. But Harrington has money, power, influence. He's using all of it against you. Elena looked up at him, her eyes blazing with determination despite her tears. Then we need to find proof that even he can't deny or explain away. Jack nodded grimly. I've been thinking the same thing. There's only one place that might have the evidence we need. Where? The silver mine, the scene of the crime. Jack's face was grim. If Pierre dropped anything else, or if there's any evidence Harrington missed, it would be there. Elena shivered. It's dangerous. If Harrington finds out we're searching the mine, he'll try to stop us. Permanently. Jack took her hand. But might be our only chance. That evening, as they prepared for what might be their last desperate gamble, Elena found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message written in block letters. Meet at the old silver mine at midnight if you want to know who really killed Pierre. Jack stared at the note. It's obviously a trap. Elena nodded. But we have no choice. Then the anonymous note arrived. Meet at the old silver mine at midnight if you want to know who really killed Pierre. It was obviously a trap, but they had no choice. Elena and Jack knew the midnight meeting at the silver mine was a trap, but with the entire town turned against them, they had no choice. What they found that would either give them justice or cost them their lives. The moon was barely a sliver in the black Colorado sky as Elena and Jack rode toward the abandoned silver mine. Their horses' hooves made soft thuds on the dusty trail, the only sound in the deadly quiet night. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady on the reins. The weeping widow was gone forever. In her place rode a woman ready to fight for the truth. We could still turn back, Jack said quietly, though they both knew they wouldn't. His rifle was loaded and ready across his saddle. Find another way. Elena shook her head. There is no other way. Harrington has the whole town believing I'm insane. If we don't end this tonight, I'll either be locked in an asylum or dead by morning. The old silver mine sat like a scar on the hillside, its wooden frame buildings dark and empty against the stars. This was where Pierre had died 2 years ago, where he had trusted the wrong person and paid with his life. Elena could feel his presence here, as if he were watching, waiting for justice. They dismounted 50 yards from the main building and tied their horses to a scrub oak. Jack checked his rifle one more time, then looked into Elena's eyes. Whatever happens in there, I want you to know something, he said. Your husband was a good man. He would be proud of the woman you've become. Elena touched his face gently. If we don't make it out of here, we will. Jack's voice was firm. We have to. Too many people are counting on us. They moved toward the mine entrance, staying low and quiet. The wooden door hung open, creaking softly in the night breeze. Inside, a single lantern glowed, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Mrs. Moreau, Harold Harrington's cultured voice echoed from the depths of the mine. Please come in. We have much to discuss. Elena and Jack exchanged a look. They both knew this was the moment of truth. Elena stepped through the doorway first, Jack close behind her. The mine's main chamber was larger than it looked from outside. Harrington stood near the back wall, impeccably dressed even at midnight, flanked by three rough-looking men Elena didn't recognize. His smile was cold and triumphant. I must say, I'm impressed, Harrington said. Most people would have taken my advice and left town by now. But you Moreaus always were too stubborn for your own good. Where's the person who sent the note? Elena demanded. Who wanted to tell us the truth about Pierre's murder? Harrington chuckled. That would be me, my dear. I thought it was time we had an honest conversation. Jack raised his rifle, but one of Harrington's men was faster. The sound of a gun cocking echoed through the chamber. Now, Harrington said calmly. No need for violence. Yet, he began to pace slowly, like a man giving a lecture. You want to know what really happened to Pierre? Very well. He came here that night because I invited him. Told him I had documents that would prove the land off his corruption. Elena's hands clenched into fists. You killed him. I defended myself and my business interests, Harrington corrected. Pierre was going to destroy everything I had built. The land deals weren't corruption. Elena, they were progress. This territory needs strong men making difficult decisions, not idealistic newspaper men stirring up trouble. You stole family's land, Jack growled. Made them homeless. I created opportunities, Harrington snapped. Those small farmers weren't using their land properly. I found better uses for it, more profitable uses. Elena stepped forward, anger blazing in her eyes. Pierre trusted you. He thought you were his friend. Pierre was naive. He actually believed I was going to help him expose the so-called conspiracy. Harrington's mask of civilization finally slipped completely. Instead, I told him the truth, that I was behind all of it, that I owned the land office clerk, the assessor, even the sheriff. Pierre's face when he realized how completely he had been fooled. It was almost worth the inconvenience of having to kill him. You monster, Elena whispered. I'm a businessman. When Pierre threatened to run that story, threatening to destroy everything I had worked for, I did what any smart businessman would do. I eliminated the problem. Jack shifted slightly, trying to get a better angle with his rifle, but Harrington's men were professionals. They kept their weapons trained on him without wavering. The beautiful irony, Harrington continued, is that no one would have believed Pierre's story anyway. I had too much influence, too much respectability, but I couldn't take the chance. He smiled coldly at Elena. Just like I can't take the chance that you'll keep digging into things that don't concern you. Elena felt something shift inside her, a cold clarity replacing her rage. You made one mistake, Harrington. And what's that? You just confessed to murder in front of witnesses. Harrington laughed. What witnesses? My associates here work for me. And after tonight, there won't be any other witnesses left. That's when Elena heard it. The soft creak of footsteps outside the mine entrance. Hope flared in her chest. Actually, Sheriff Coleman's voice rang out from the darkness. There will be plenty of witnesses. Harrington spun around as Sheriff Coleman stepped into the lantern light, his gun drawn. Behind him came Mayor Fitzpatrick and two deputies. Sheriff. Harrington's composure cracked for the first time. What are you doing here? My job, Coleman said grimly. The job I should have done 2 years ago. Elena stared in confusion. But you were on his side. You threatened me just this afternoon. I was trying to keep you safe, Coleman replied. Jack came to see me yesterday. Told me about the evidence you found. Asked me to play along with Harrington's game until we could catch him in the act. Jack smiled grimly. Sometimes the best trap is when the prey thinks they're setting one. Harrington's men, outnumbered and surrounded, slowly lowered their weapons. But Harrington himself wasn't finished. His hand moved toward his coat. No, Elena screamed, diving toward Jack. The gunshot echoed through the mine like thunder. Elena felt Jack's body jerk as the bullet meant for her tore through his shoulder. They hit the ground together, Jack's blood warm on her dress. More gunshots followed. When the smoke cleared, Harrington lay motionless on the mine floor, his final gamble lost. Jack lay bleeding in Elena's arms, his breath growing weaker. Had their quest for justice cost them everything? Would Elena lose the only man who'd ever truly seen her? After Harrington's death and Jack's wounding in a silver mine, Elena faced her greatest fear, losing the man who had given her back her life. But sometimes love's greatest victories come after its darkest moments. Elena had never prayed so hard in her life. For 3 days, she sat beside Jack's bed in Doc Morrison's clinic, holding his hand and willing him to live. The bullet had torn through his shoulder, missing his heart by inches. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling her name, sometimes fighting fever dreams about the mine. He's strong, Doc Morrison said on the 3rd morning, checking Jack's bandages. The fever broke during the night. He's going to make it. Elena's tears finally came then. Not the bitter tears of guilt and grief she had cried for 2 years, but tears of pure relief and joy. Jack's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face. Elena, his voice was rough but alert. Are you all right? Did Harrington hurt you? She laughed through her tears, squeezing his hand. Harrington's dead, Jack. It's over. Sheriff Coleman arrested his men, and they're talking. The whole land fraud scheme is being exposed. Jack tried to sit up, but winced. And you? Are you safe? I'm safe. We're both safe. Elena brushed the hair back from his forehead. Rest now. You've done enough heroic things for 1 week. Over the next few days, as Jack recovered, the truth about Harold Harrington's crimes spread through Millbrook like wildfire. The sheriff's investigation uncovered dozens of forged land deeds, stolen properties, and families who had been cheated out of their homes. More importantly, people learned that Elena Moreau wasn't the crazy widow they had believed her to be. She was the brave woman who had risked everything to expose the truth. Mrs. Henderson was the first to apologize, arriving at Elena's door with a basket of fresh vegetables. I'm ashamed of how we treated you, she said, her face red with embarrassment. Harold Harrington fooled us all. The grocer, Mr. Watson, reopened Elena's credit and personally delivered flour to her door. Your bread was always the best in town, he admitted. I should never have listened to that snake Harrington. Even Father Murphy visited, asking for Elena's forgiveness. I let fear and gossip cloud my judgment, he said. Pierre would be proud of what you've done. But it was Mayor Fitzpatrick's visit that surprised Elena the most. The town council wants to make an official apology, he said. We're also establishing a fund to help the families who lost their land because of Harrington's schemes. Elena accepted their apologies with grace, but she could see the change in their eyes. They no longer looked at her with pity or suspicion. They looked at her with respect. A week after the confrontation at the mine, Jack was strong enough to leave the clinic. Elena had prepared a special meal to welcome him to her home. Roast chicken, fresh bread, and apple pie made from Pierre's favorite recipe. This smells like heaven, Jack said, settling carefully into Pierre's old chair by the fireplace. His arm was still in a sling, but his color was good and his smile was warm. Elena served the meal, her hands steady and sure. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't crying as she cooked. Instead, she found herself humming, a happy tune she remembered from her childhood in New Orleans. There's something I need to tell you, Jack said after they had eaten. Something I should have said before we went to that mine. Elena looked up from clearing the dishes. What is it? Jack stood up slowly, his good hand reaching for hers. I came to this town to watch over you, to keep the promise I made to your dying husband. But somewhere along the way, protecting you became something more. Elena's heart began to race. Jack, I know I'm not much of a catch. Just a cowboy with a guilty conscience and a bullet scar. But Elena, these past weeks with you, fighting for justice, seeing your strength, your courage, I've fallen in love with you. Elena stared at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You think you're not much of catch? Jack Sullivan, you're the man who gave me back my life. You helped me find the truth about Pierre's death. You took a bullet meant for me. Jack cupped her face gently with his good hand. Does that mean? Yes, Elena whispered. I love you too. I think I started falling for you the day you bought all my bread and saw through my tears to the truth underneath. Their kiss was soft and sweet, tasting of apple pie and new beginnings. When they broke apart, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise you a fancy house or a life of luxury, he said. I'm just a working man. Elena laughed. I don't want fancy things. I want a partner. Someone who believes in justice and isn't afraid to fight for what's right. Someone who sees me as I really am. Then will you marry me, Elena Moreau? Yes, she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. 1 month later, on a bright Saturday morning, Elena Moreau became Elena Sullivan in a ceremony that transformed Millbrook's town square. The same people who had shunned her weeks before now filled every bench and lined the streets to celebrate. Mrs. Henderson and the other ladies had decorated the entire square with wildflowers. The baker, Mr. Watson, had donated ingredients for the biggest wedding cake the town had ever seen. Most importantly, Elena baked the cake herself. 3 tiers of vanilla sponge with strawberry filling decorated with sugar flowers. And for the first time since Pierre's death, she baked without a single tear. Her hands were steady, her heart was full, and her tears, when they came, were tears of pure joy. Look at her, Mrs. Henderson whispered to her friend as Elena walked down the makeshift aisle in a simple white dress. Have you ever seen anyone so happy? Father Murphy performed the ceremony with special joy, knowing he was marrying 2 people who had found each other through darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. Do you, Elena, take Jack to be your husband, in good times and bad, in sickness and health, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Elena said, her voice clear and strong. Do you, Jack, take Elena to be your wife, to love and protect, in good times and bad, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Jack said, his gray eyes never leaving Elena's face. When Father Murphy pronounced them husband and wife, the entire town cheered. Jack's kiss was gentle but passionate, sealing a love that had grown from tragedy into triumph. 1 year later, Elena stood in the same spot where she used to cry over her bread, but everything had changed. The sign above her market stall read, Sullivan and Moreau Bakery, made with love. Jack stood beside her, his arm healed and strong, helping her arrange the morning's fresh loaves. Mama Elena, Mama Elena. Little Lucy Watson ran up to their stall, her face bright with excitement. Can I have a sugar cookie? Elena handed the child a warm cookie, ruffling her hair with flour-dusted fingers. All around the market, families gathered to buy bread that had once been cursed but was now blessed. Children laughed and played between stalls. The sun shone bright and warm. Any regrets? Jack asked quietly, watching his wife's face glow with contentment. Elena looked around at the bustling market, at the town that had rejected her, and then welcomed her back, at the life she and Jack had built together from ashes and truth. Only one, she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. That it took me so long to stop crying long enough to see that sometimes the best things in life come after the worst. She had learned that tears of grief could transform into tears of joy, that love could bloom in the darkest places, and that sometimes the weeping widow becomes the woman who teaches others how to smile. Elena thought she would spend her life alone, selling bread and carrying guilt. Instead, she found justice, love, and a community that learned to see beyond gossip to the truth. Her tears had watered the ground where love grew strong and deep.